You never know where a singing career starts. I've said numerous times, almost every year you see American Idol, the top 10 contenders, 3 or 4 of them are from churches, and they began just like that, so you never know. So I just hope if they go on and they're successful, they remember to tithe. So anyway, I'm teasing. Okay. Well, before I begin this, I want to begin with kind of like a personal illustration, so that I can hopefully get us tuned into the significance of what I want to talk about this morning. So when I think about what it took for me to get my doctoral degree, I was thinking about that this morning, and I thought, when I was at Geneva College, it was 126 credit hours and about 5 semesters that I went to school, and at the time, way back then, about $36,000 would be much more. That's 1 year now, as opposed to just 4 years of schooling. But so then I went and got my master's degree, and that was 64 credits, and that's about twice what you would normally do in terms of the average master's degree. The average master's degree is about 36. Mine was 64. Then I went on and I got my doctoral degree, and that was 36 credits. And here's what's involved in that. So typically, for every hour that you have in a doctoral degree program, you're expected to read about 1,000 pages per hour, per credit. So it's about 1,000 pages per credit. So if you have 3 credits, it's about 3,000 or 4,000 pages that you have to read per class. If you have 12 credits and it's 4,000 pages, then what is that? That's 16,000 pages. I'm sorry, 16. Oh my gosh, what's wrong with me this morning? So I had this all figured out this morning So let me just say, it's about 3,000 pages, usually about 4,000 pages per class. If you have 4 classes, that's 16,000 pages for a semester. If you take 20 minutes, if you take 1 hour to read 20 pages, which is what they typically allot for you, 1 hour per 20 pages, times 4,000, that's 200 hours. In the semester, that's 800 hours of reading. Just reading. That's not writing. That's not being in class. Ideally, that's 800 hours just to read for 1 semester. If you have 4 semesters, that's 3,200 hours of reading. And then you have to do this thing called a thesis. And when you do the thesis, you spend all kinds of time trying to figure out what you want to write about. And then you have to spend a significant amount of time articulating the title, the thesis, the primary sentence that you have. It's 1 sentence about what you want to write about. It has to be very tight and very compact and very, very, very meaningful. You can spend days just coming up with that 1 sentence that will guide 150 pages that you have to type. That's about 3 hours per page, 4 hours per page, in order to write this thesis. So then after you write this thesis, which takes all these hours, and you have to have all the right sourcing, you have to footnote it, you have to come up with your bibliography, you have to make sure it's grammatically correct, perfect, punctually correct, perfect, everything. So for mine, I ended up with about 250 pages. Everything had to be perfect. So then after you do all that, you've completed all your classwork, you've written your thesis, you've gone over innumerable revisions. You spent time with your thesis advisor, and then you go into this committee, and it's a group of scholars who know something about what you've written about. So you spent all those hours reading, all those hours writing, all those hours in classes, all those hours writing. You go in, you meet before 3 or 4 people who are scholars, an august group of people who know something about what it is that you've written on. And do you know what the number one question, after you read your thesis statement, do you know the number one question they ask you? The number one question. So what? If what you say is true, so what? Why is that important? Why was it, how is that helpful to people? Why is that meaningful? So what? And so all the questions that they ask from that point on are predicated on that overarching question of so what? Pretty amazing, isn't it? Now, for the last 2,000 years, and prior to that, 1,500 years, 66 books were written. 33 books in the New Testament, Ruth? Is that what it is? Yeah. 33 books in the New Testament. Books that would fill building after building after building that have been written about Jesus and his saving plan for humanity. Nations have risen, fallen, and have risen again over this person named Jesus. Thousands upon thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people have traveled all over the world. Many have suffered and died. Some have died knowing that the sacrifice they made was significant, and others have died without anybody ever knowing the sacrifice that they have made in an effort for people to know the significance of Jesus Christ. Schools have been formed. Some of the best schools in the entire world, Princeton, Harvard, Yale, Oxford, were established because of people wanting other people to know Jesus Christ. And today, we live in a world where most of the people in this culture, when they see and hear and experience the Christmas season, most of them are asking the question, so what? I remember years ago listening to a radio program, and it was a talk show. And they were talking about how there was this lawsuit that people were filing against the city because they put a nativity scene up in a park somewhere in the town. And they went on from that conversation to say, why is this important? Like, why do we have to even call it Christmas? Why can't we call it like the winter holiday season holiday, or why, how about sparkle season? They were so incredibly dismissive of the significance of Christmas. Christmas, Christ-mas. Christ meaning Messiah, the Anointed One. Mus is Latin for day. Christ's day. In about a week, we are going to celebrate Christ's Day, a day that has dominated the calendar of Western civilization for almost 2,000 years. It is Christ's Day. The day of Christ. We celebrate his birthday. But the meaning and the significance of that upon most of our culture has been utterly and completely lost. They understand that we are celebrating the birth of Jesus Christ, but they have no comprehension, none, of the overarching significance of Christ's day and why it's worthy of the kind of significance and celebration we have given to it for 2,000 years. All that effort, all that time, all that work, all that sacrifice, and in our time today, the significance of Christ's day is largely lost on most of our population, and largely lost, for all practical purposes, on much of the church. Because too many of us check boxes during the Advent season. It's not really as significant as it should be. And to the degree that the church and Christians within the church simply jump through the hoops of the significance of Christ's day and the Advent season, we are not conveying to the world the significance of Christ's day in the way so that they get that overarching, very powerful, very significant sense of why it's so very important. So I'm going to spend some time on that this morning, and it's it's more of a Bible study and it's a little more dense. But I don't know how else to get to it so that you understand the overarching significance and importance of Christ's day. It's more than just this pastoral image of this little baby Jesus being born in a manger with to a young girl and a young man that the world has largely ignored and didn't care about and didn't attend to. It's the beginning of this monumental thing that was about to unleash itself upon the world and upon the created order. And it's that monumental element that is largely lost on us. We read all the time in the newspaper, see it on the news, where a soldier gave their life on behalf of their friends or behalf of their country. And one of the most sacred things that you cannot do is to disparage to those parents the sacrifice of their son or daughter on behalf of this country. It's still like a really horrible thing to do because of the monumental impact it had on their lives and the lives of other people. The significance of that. And the same is true for Jesus Christ. The monumental impact that God, the God of the universe, the God that created everything, the God that is so big that the universe that we know and understand is nothing but a pinprick of significance in his existence. That God sent his son as a baby, fully God, fully man, so that the demands of the law could be met and that you and I could be restored into right relationship with God himself. That kind of significance. So, I'm going to spend some time then talking about the progression of this and the overarching context of why it's important. And I hope that it's helpful to you and that it helps to prevent any of us from jumping through the hoops that are so easy to jump through during the Advent season. So our Advent, so keep in mind then that our theme that we've used during this Advent season is this: Isaiah 9:2. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in the land of deep darkness, on them a light has shined. Words of great hope. In fact, let's read it. Let us read that together. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in a land of deep darkness, on them a light has shined. I guess, there are so many ways that I could unpack that text, and I don't have time this morning. But there are so many presumptions in this text itself. The people who walk in darkness. Most people don't see themselves as walking in darkness because they don't have a very good sense of God's holiness and His goodness, and that their goodness and their holiness by comparison is darkness. And that we, whether we realize it or not, dwell in deep darkness apart from God. And that Jesus Christ, by His birth and His death on the cross, a light has shined. And so we need to see and to attend to that light. Now, I do believe that every Advent season there should be some discussion about the fall of mankind from light into darkness. So I'm going to give you a couple of classic texts in the Old Testament that are used, for example, in reference to how our darkness began. And our darkness began because there was a person that we know, and his name was Satan. And he was at one time an archangel, and in good relationship with God Himself, but he fell. And here are a couple of texts that describe that. This is from Ezekiel 28. The larger context is 13 through 19, but I want to just spend time on 17, where he is described as this: Your heart was proud because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom for the sake of your splendor. And so in this text, there is a description of the beauty of Satan himself prior to his fall and his glory. And because he had that, he became prideful and he fell. Here's another one from Isaiah 14, verses 12 through 15. The fall of Satan from light into darkness. How you have fallen from heaven, O day star, son of the dawn. How you were cut down to the ground, you who laid the nations low. You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven, above the stars of God. I will set my throne on high. I will sit on the mount of assembly in the far reaches of the north. And so in this particular text, he's saying in his heart, Satan is saying to himself, I'm going to ascend. I'm going to go higher still in heaven, above God Himself. I will set my throne on high, even above Him. I will sit on or over the assembly of all of heaven itself, and in a remote place where I am inaccessible. Nobody can get to me. This is what Satan said to himself. The text goes on to say, I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. But you were brought down to Sheol, to the far reaches of the pit. And so in this text then we read the description of how Satan fell because of his pride, because he wanted to be like God. And because he wanted to be like God, he was cast into the darkness. Now we read about the fall of Adam and Eve, from light into darkness. Interestingly, it parallels Satan's fall from light into darkness. We read this first in Genesis 1:27 through Genesis 2:27, and it spans into Genesis 3:1. Just understand the way that the Bible is broken down into the chapter and verse is not considered to be it's not considered to be infallible. That sometimes there are breaks in places where maybe those weren't the best places to have a break. There's a break here. These two verses are probably related. And so I'm going to read them to you. And the man and his wife were both naked, and that Hebrew word is achrom, and were not ashamed. Then we go right into chapter 3, verse 1. Now the serpent was crafty, achrum, than any other beast of the field that the Lord God had made. The writer here has a play on words. And the play on words, achrom versus achrum, is to say there was this exchange. That the nakedness, the innocence, the purity, the goodness of Adam and Eve were exchanged for the craftiness, the evil, the deceit of Satan. That's what's going on in this particular text. That's why that play on words is there. There's been this exchange. It was about to happen. And he's leading up to that by writing it in this way. So then we come to Genesis 3, verses 4 through 5. But the serpent said to the woman, as he's trying to tempt her to eat of the tree of the fruit of good knowledge and evil, he says, but the serpent says to the woman, sure, you will surely not die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Why did Adam and Eve partake of the fruit? They wanted to be like God. Who else wanted to be like God? Satan himself. So you see this parallel that's taking place here, right? So in the same way that because he fell and they fell, the same thing that happened to him happens to them. They are cast out of the presence of God, and there is a loss of blessings and benefits and privileges. And we read this in Genesis 3:23 through 24. It reads, therefore, the Lord God sent him out from the Garden of Eden to work the ground from which he was taken. He drove out the man, and at the east of the Garden of Eden he placed a cherubim and a flaming sword, and turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life. And so they are cast out of the Garden of Eden. In the same way, so if you read in the Ezekiel passage, for example, Ezekiel in that larger passage references how Satan lived in the garden of God. And he was cast out of the garden of God. Adam and Eve were cast out of the garden of God because both rebelled. And in their rebellion wanted to be like God. That rebellion and that pride is what cast them into darkness and brought darkness upon the world. That's the darkness that Jesus Christ came to save us from. So this deception then that Satan placed upon Eve and Adam actually wasn't like to become like God. The deception really was for him to become like him. And that's what happened. To leave God's light, to live in alienated darkness, to take on Satan's character, and then to receive a similar judgment. That darkness manifested itself in a variety of ways throughout the course of human history. One of the earliest books written in the Bible is a book called Job. Maybe the earliest book ever written. And Job, as he's recounting his sufferings, says this about his experience. Before I go, and I shall not return, to the land of darkness and deep shadow, the land of gloom, where thick darkness, like deep shadow, without any order, where light is as thick as darkness. That was his experience. That's how the fall impacted him. And that's how the fall impacts many people. There's a reason why we don't experience as much darkness in our culture as many people do in theirs. We are still benefiting from a thing called the Judeo-Christian worldview and how it impacted our world and the way in which we did business and how we lived our lives. There were many blessings that came from that about how to treat people, how to be moral and ethical. And those things in and of themselves kept darkness from impacting us in the same kind of way that it does in other places of the world. There are people, probably most people, who in the whole of their life would never acquire as much wealth as you have in 1 year. That the lack of wealth, the lack of health, the oppression that they experience is only darkness in their lives with very little hope. But you and I benefit. We benefit from how our world was shaped largely because of a robust church and a Judeo-Christian worldview that dominated our culture for almost 2.5 centuries, but now not so much. So in that darkness, as it unfolded in the lives of humanity, there was a trajectory that took place, and this is what it was. Adam and Eve walked with God in the garden, and then so they lived in the light. But today, that's regarded as myth. They worshiped only God, and there were never any images used originally in their lives. That also is regarded as a myth today. Humankind eventually began to worship crude images depicting God. And that was called a religion. So they used stones and wood and idols to depict what they thought God looked like. Eventually, they worshiped other idols in place of God. And so that became syncretism and polytheism, a variety of different religions that were blended or different from God, from the one that we know and understand. And then eventually, believe it or not, throughout all of the world, but particularly in Israel as well, there began this thing called the worship of Molech or Satan, which is exactly what Satan wanted. Worship of him. That was his goal. And then finally, there was the worship of ourselves in place of God. And that is considered to be enlightened and rational. That's today. That's why they ask the so what question. Because according to people, the social elites, the cultural influencers, we don't need all this stuff that happened before. We can do it on our own. We have the ability. It's all good. That's why we need Christ, because that's not true. So I'm going to skip over some things here, and I'm going to go to a text because I want to make sure that I leave us with a message of hope and encouragement. So in this slide, it says Jesus as light for mankind living in darkness. And it reads from John 4, verses 1 through 9. So John records, this is John the Apostle, in him Jesus was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to bear witness about the light, that all might believe through him. The true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. Now, some people have experienced exactly that their lives, even in this world, even in this culture, was all darkness. And when they had an encounter with Christ, their life changed. And it was as if there were these giant floodlights entered into their heart and their mind, and they saw everything differently. And they could see in that light life and hope. But for some, it's not that way. For some, the cultural influencers, the elite, they've changed the rules. And so now it's more like what Isaiah said in 5:20, where he says, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter." That's the world that we live in today. That's the world that's turned everything upside down. Imagine if you encountered a blind man and he said to you, "You're the one that's blind. I'm the one that sees. I demand that you see the world as I see it and not as you see it. I demand that you alter your world so that people like me can navigate that world better, even if it means you can't navigate the world in which you live, and because you can see the way you see as you want." That's what the cultural influencers say. That's what the social elites say. So there's been this rescue from darkness into light. And that rescue happened because of what Jesus did for us on the cross. So we read in Colossians 1, verses 12 through 13, where the Apostle Paul says, "In giving joyful thanks to the Father, who has qualified you to share in the inheritance of his holy people in the kingdom of light. For he has rescued us from the dominion of darkness and brought us into the kingdom of the light, the kingdom his Son loves." And brought us into the kingdom the Son he loves. And so now, because of Jesus' birth and because of his death, those of us who believe, have been rescued from the dominion of darkness and brought into the kingdom of light. That's the part that much of this world doesn't get. They don't understand it. They don't agree with that. And the reason why they don't is because they buy into a wholly other kind of ideology or worldview. These are the people who ask the "so what" question. These are the people who fail to see the weight, the significance, the amount of of who God is, of his creation of us, of our falling away from him, and the effort that he made to rescue us and to restore us unto himself. That began in that nativity 2,000 years ago. These people we know as secular progressivists. And they believe this, that it is the inexorable evolution of humankind from darkness into the enlightenment. So they see things differently than what we see. So the philosophy is basically this. It is a broad philosophy based on the idea of progress, which asserts that advancement in science, technology, economic development, and social organization are vital to improve the human condition. Social progressivism ultimately becomes a kind of self-deification. Humankind will continue to advance and evolve upwardly as a species. Our use of reason, logic, and social engineering and science is what will ensure this. This is what dominates higher education. It is what dominates your secondary schools. It is what dominates a significant portion of our politics today. It dominates it. It runs full in the face of what you and I believe in terms of our Judeo-Christian worldview. So the primary cure of what plagues humanity are these things: fully state-controlled education, comprehensive social equity, not equality, equity, equal outcomes for everyone. Economic opportunity and fairness, comprehensive, strong, and centralized government, rigorous principles of what is called pan-unipolarism. This is what pan-unipolarism is. Everyone and everywhere, at all times and in all places, must think, believe, and value the same predetermined things. That's on the next slide there, Bree. So think about this. Men and women are basically the same. Gender is a social construct. That's this. There is no difference between races. There's no difference between men and women. We're all the same. We're just all the same. We're all made in the image of God. And in that way, we're all the same. By being made in the image of God, we all have the same kind of equality. That is true. But God has created a diversified human species. That should be celebrated. Those strengths should be pronounced. But when you require that everyone and everywhere at all times and in all places must think, believe, and value the same predetermined things, when the social elites say that all religions are basically the same, there really is no difference. The core values are very similar. So there's no reason then to proselytize. There's no reason to tell other people about your faith because your faith is basically the same as theirs. Why risk alienating somebody or making them angry or whatever? Just let them be whatever they want to be and you be what you want to be, as long as we say that what you want to be is okay. So it looks like this. On to the next slide. This is the difference between the Judeo-Christian worldview and progressivism, and this is the first time in human history we have ever seen this. This is oftentimes what makes me think that we might really be in the end of times, all right? So, in the Judeo-Christian worldview, we see, the Christians see the garden event as the apex of man and then the fall of man. So the apex of humanity occurred in the garden. We were never better than when we were in the garden. Progressivism sees humanity as apes and evolution. So that we were created, we evolved into apes. It's down, one more, hit it again, Bree. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, thank you. So we see that as the apex, and because of the fall, there is a falling. The created order, humanity continues to fall and get worse. There is a dystopian and disintegration of humanity over time. You think, well, that can't be true. I mean, look how much we've progressed. We have progressed in science and technology and all those kind of things. I can only tell you that the 20th century was the most violent century in human history because we used science and technology to make that happen. Fully 250 million people were disaffected by genocide and war in the 20th century. 160 million people were annihilated by their own governments in the 20th century. And we all did it using our science and our technology. We could have never done it that as well otherwise. Social progressivism believes that we began as apes and that we have evolved and that we are on this trajectory to a utopia, to a kind of shalom when we will be at peace because, of course, all people at all times and all places will think, value, and believe and do the same things. So that's what will make it happen. But Christians believe that because of the fall and the falling that we needed Christ. And so that there was this event called the Nativity and the cross. And that's what rescues us and takes us up to the utopia, to shalom, to heaven. Does this make sense to you? But in reality, if social progressivism has its way, they think that they are heading towards a utopia, but that's not what happens. It goes back to the dystopian and disintegration into the separation of hell. Hit it one more time, if you would. So that arrow, one more time, Bree. Oh, it didn't happen. So when I did it on my PowerPoint, the white arrow is cut off, and it goes up to the green, and it goes back down to dystopian and disintegration, and then to separation and hell. That's what happens. We need Jesus. We don't need us. We need Christ. So, what's in store for us? What can happen if we follow Christ? We read here in John 3:16 through 21. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him. Whoever believes, trusts, follows, commits to him is not condemned. But whoever does not believe is condemned already because he has not believed in the name. He has not trusted in the name of the only Son of God. And this is the judgment. The light has come into the world, and people love the darkness rather than the light because their works are evil. People who do not choose Christ love darkness. People who do choose Christ love the light. For everyone who does wicked things hates the light and does not come into the light, lest his works should be exposed. But whoever does what is true comes into the light, so that it may be clearly seen that his works have been carried out in God. So that is our hope. That is the light that Christ can give to us. And so I want to conclude with this great text from the book of Revelation. And just know that I've cut a bunch of stuff out here, and I've kind of interrupted my progression a little bit of thought, but I want to end in a timely manner. And so I want to read this because this is our hope. This is what we look forward to. Look, understand this. The work of Christ is to restore us back to our original state. One of the arguments that progressives oftentimes use is they'll say, well, of course, look, Adam and Eve were myth, and they were primordial, and they were unsophisticated, and they weren't. They were the best that humans could be. And because they were the best that humans could be, and because they lived in the best place that humans could live, they had no need of technology, of government, of social science, of medicine. Science, technology, medicine, government are compensations because of the fall. They exist because the fall exists. Had there been no fall, there would be no need for science, technology, medicine, and government, because we would all be perfect and in perfect health. And it's the work of Christ on the cross to restore us to our original condition that Adam and Eve enjoyed. Heaven is a place where there's only one who governs. Heaven is a place who restores us fully and completely as we should have been in the first place. Heaven is a place where all of us get together and get along and love each other unconditionally. That is what heaven is. That is the work of Christ to restore in our life. That is our hope. And there is no darkness in any of that. And so we read here in Revelation 21, this is the city that we will live in. And the city has no need of sun or moon to shine on it. For the glory of God gives it light, and its lamp is the Lamb. By its light will the nations walk, and the kings of the earth will bring their glory into it. So they bring whatever kings of the earth, leaders, whatever makes them glorified, they bring it and submit it to heaven itself. It's submissive. It surrenders to the glory of heaven itself. And the gates will never be shut by day because it's safe. And there will be no night there. They will bring it into it the glory and the honor of the nations. That is the world that Christ wants to save us to bring us out of the darkness and into the light. That is not the world that many people believe exists today. This is the world that you and I celebrate Advent and Christmas for, the day of Christ, because this is what is ours. And it began 2,000 years ago with the light of Christ coming into a very dark world. And because of his sacrifice upon the cross, drives back that darkness and enables us to participate in this world that is promised to those who believe and trust in the light of Christ. It's that nativity event that began it all. It was the crucifixion event that solved it all. By the way, when you're driving, drive past Jeff's yard, because he has that in his yard. He has the nativity scene and he has a cross right beside each other. That's orthodoxy. That's meaning. Those are the kinds of things that we need to convey to people who trust in something that cannot save. Will you pray with me? Lord, thank you so much for this morning. Thank you for your great work upon the cross. And thank you for beginning all of that in the nativity, the birth of Jesus that began this whole new trajectory for humankind, that now we could have hope, that in our hearts there need no longer be any darkness. In the world in which we live, there need not be darkness. You enable us to overcome all of that. Help us, we pray, this Advent season to see the larger picture, to truly appreciate, so that when people are asking the so what question, they see it living vitally within our lives. Help us, we pray. In your name, amen. Let's stand and sing our last song together.